Welcome to Out Fast. My name is Jeremy. I'm going to be taking you guys through a quick journey on how we think about rental prices and when you are considering buying an asset, making sure that the rent comps are going to meet your expectations, but also if you currently have a rental, are the tenants under market? How much can we increase them when it comes time to lease renewal? If you have a tenant that's going to move out, how do we think about pricing the property? So there's a lot of things that we consider and think about when we're going to price the rental properties. But in general, we're going to look for properties that are very similar in size, amenities, condition, year, that sort of stuff to give you guys an idea of what's closest to you. So if you're in the single family market or townhouses, we're going to look at, within half a mile, we're going to try to take a look at other houses that are in a similar build, year, square footage, maybe within 100 to 200 square feet above or below, and bedrooms, bathrooms. If we can't find an exact match in the last 6 months that's leased and in a condition that's similar to yours, we may go, from 3 bedroom to 4, look at a 4.2 and sort of get an idea and then price downward a little bit. Or alternately, we might go a little bit further back in time. Instead of 6 months, we might go 9 months, 12 months, and then try to account for market changes within that. So in general, we're going to stay within half a mile, not crossing any waterways, railroads, anything like that. There also could be other exterior factors around your property. If there's a satellite in the backyard, that could sort of deter it. Neighbor properties that may not look as nice or could be run down could also impact the rental price. So we're going to take a look at your local community, depending on where you're at. If you're in a community, it might be a little bit easier to price that pretty quickly. If you're in an HOA, there's a lot of similar houses as opposed to somewhere in Tampa, St. Pete, where one street over you could have $1 million house, and one street over you could have one that looks like it needs to be torn down, right? So it can be a little bit more competitive or more challenging to go ahead and do it in those areas. But that's what we're going to take a look at for you. We're going to use a lot of data. We're going to take a look at properties that we manage that are nearby that might give us a perspective, but also what's the general market doing. So we're going to use what we use as brokers, realtors. The MLS gives us a really good perspective on stuff that's actually leasing. So you want to be careful between looking around and seeing what's for rent. For rent means nobody has paid that price, and that's sort of a lagging indicator, right? We're going to look at properties that are either pending or actually leased, which means somebody, if it's listed for 19, but it leases for 18, then obviously there was a price decrease. They did not get the amount that they were looking for. And then also time on market is something that we're going to consider. So if the national average at the time of this recording is 45, 50 days to fill a vacancy, that's pretty long, right? So we want to try to do that in 30 days or less. Our company, I would say over the last 10 years, our historical average has been right around 3 weeks, maybe up to 4 weeks. And it depends on the seasonality of the year to get an approved application. So we have a pretty good process, proven process, a lot of rentals that we filled over time. So those are some of the things that we're going to take a look at is the condition, what's nearby, are there any amenities? So when you get into multifamily space and you have an asset that's over 5 units, is there any other amenities or things on the property that we can add value to it that may help you ask for more rent? Is there Wi-Fi included? Some of the other things, a little dog park, outdoor grill, that sort of stuff that may change it, but we'll take those things into consideration. Also seasonality, so slower time of the year, obviously like November, December, a lot of people don't rent. January is still sometimes a little bit slow, starts to pick up February, March, all the way through maybe September. Can be a sort of peak season. So then obviously during the school year, could be a lot of people moving. So the price, although let's say in the peak season, you might get $2,000. Well, hey, when it's November, December, that same property may only go for like, 1,900, right? There could be a difference on time of year. That's one thing that we'll take into consideration as well. Obviously, property condition, we kind of talked about that a little bit already. If it's updated, if it's not, has anything been updated in the last 5 years, it's going to obviously impact price as well. The investor's objective is another big thing. So sometimes we get clients that are an accidental landlord. They're used to, living in a house and they're moving out and they're renting it out and they never really thought that they maybe rent that out. And so depending on what they paid, interest rates, they may want to keep it. And so sometimes with those investors, we typically see that they just really want to try to preserve the asset. Sometimes they're making money, sometimes they're not, depending on how much they did for their down payment and all that sort of stuff. Right? The thought process is a little bit different sometimes, whereas investors that are buying assets as rental properties with that strategy are going to be much more focused on the cash flow and making sure that their investments worth it, right? The money that they're putting down, if they're using leverage, if they're getting a loan on the property, they might be taking a look at their cash on cash return. They may have some other objectives. They may want to refinance in 5 years, pull out the cash and buy another property. So their objectives could be quite different on how we price the properties as well. And then it also depends on what the current tenant's paying. If there's tenants already inside the units and the units are under market, we might be able to just renew them and keep them in there. And so instead of vacating a tenant and having to spend 10 grand on renovating a unit, we may say, hey, owner, tenant's paying $1,000, market rate's 1,500. We can keep them month to month, and maybe we get them at 1,250 for right now, where they're still under market. You don't have to spend the 10 grand, and we keep them there for 6 months, and then we reevaluate. So there could be a strategy in place depending on things like that, especially when it comes to the multifamily space, of how you want to be strategic around the increases and the renting prices. So that's something that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. And then on an ongoing basis, when your property is for rent with us, we're taking a look at that multiple times a week. How many showings are we getting, or inquiries are we getting? How many inquiries are going to showings? How many showings are resulting in a conducted showing, not a canceled or rescheduled? And then once the showing actually happens, how many people are applying? And then those that are applying, how many of them are qualified? So all of those different stages gives us insights into how we're priced and what the residents think of the market. That's something that we take a look at multiple times a week. So at least weekly, we're sort of taking a look at that, making recommendations on pricing downward. And just one last thing is when we're taking a look at data of leased properties, if the nearest comp that we find is 3 months ago, 6 months ago, that leased, and the market's kind of going sideways, getting soft, or even declining, we're actually behind the 8 ball. So if a unit rented for $2,000 6 months ago, and we feel like the market's a little bit like not great, we would actually price it probably at like 19, right? You price it a little bit because it's trailing numbers. The market's declined possibly since then. So you do have to be careful even looking at leased properties, depending on what the market's actually doing and what your competition is. If your neighboring property, your neighbor has their house or their apartment building for rent and they're offering huge incentives, or they're just renting it lower, then you're unfortunately in the rents. Even though if it was just you in the market, you could price it higher. You're going to get stuck having to be price competitive and possibly rent it for less because your neighbor's property is going to rent for more or rent faster than yours if you price it above them. So that's something also that really have no control over, but could be a sort of impacting factor. So I hope this was helpful. Give you guys an idea how we think about pricing your rental property.